Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. We begin tonight in Winnipeg, where the investigation into the shooting death of a 16-year-old First Nations girl is over. In the spring of last year, 16-year-old Eishia Hudson was shot and killed by Winnipeg police after an alleged liquor store robbery. Today, the Independent Investigation Unit released their report saying no charges will be filed against the officer who shot Hudson. In April of 2020, when officers attempted to arrest the suspects, who were all under 18, police said Hudson was shot. She was transported to hospital where she later died. The Independent Investigation Unit then oversaw the investigation into her death. Hudson was the youngest of 7 siblings and was one of 3 Indigenous people shot and killed by Winnipeg police in a 10-day period last year. There have been numerous rallies bringing awareness to her death and other Indigenous lives lost to police shootings. For more, we are joined now by reporter Brittany Hobson, who originally covered the story and has an update on the IIU's investigation. Brittany, thanks for joining us. We know the IIU is not recommending charges against the officer. Can you give us some more insight into the investigation?
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. So the report was about 15 pages and went over the moments leading up to Ms. Hudson's death, from when police got the call about the alleged robbery at the liquor store, the subsequent police chase that took place, and then the shooting. In it, they spoke to more than a dozen witnesses, including 3 of the teens who were in the car at the time with Ms. Hudson. One teen declined to speak with investigators, as well as the officers that were on scene. Now, the officer that shot Ms. Hudson declined to be interviewed. The investigation team can't compel officers to speak with them, but he did hand over his police notes and a statement. And ultimately what they found was that during the chase, police did try to stop the car by putting down a spike belt, but before they got to that, the car was driven, the driver, Ms. Hudson, had driven the car into a truck, and then police tried to block off that car from going any further, and it all led up to the officer who shot Eishia, or Ms. Hudson, fired 2 rounds, and one of them hit Ms. Hudson.
So what was the reasoning for not recommending charges?
So ultimately, the IIU consulted an expert, a use of force expert based out of Alberta that they would not name, to get their insights on whether it was justified or not. Given the evidence that was put forth, that expert said that it was justified. They also went over Winnipeg Police Service's protocols in these situations and found that the police officers did follow protocols. They did forward it off to the Manitoba Prosecution Office, but they came back with their own report that hasn't been released, saying that they do not recommend charges, and that's ultimately what the IIU went with.
The family, First Nations leaders, and First Nations politicians spoke this afternoon. What was the reaction from them?
It was an emotional moment. I think Ms. Hudson's father, William, who has been quite outspoken during all this, got quite emotional. You know, he spoke about, you know, how his daughter, who was only 16 years old at the time, you know, was like any other kid, really, enjoyed sports. He talked about, you know, experiencing a lot of anger and disappointment in the process. He felt that the report was whitewashed and one-sided and unclear. He didn't feel that he was confident in the investigators' ability to be impartial. You know, and First Nations leaders said the same thing. They talked about how, you know, it's basically police investigating police. A part of this IIU is, you know, former police officers. So there is that question on whether they can be impartial. So it was a very emotional, they held a press conference, it was very emotional, and they just basically spoke about their overall disappointment.
What happens now?
So the family, as well as other leaders, are calling for a public inquiry into police-involved shootings with Indigenous peoples. There's also, the possibility of an inquest being called from the Chief Medical Examiner's office, and it's likely that it will be called in this case. And as well as the Manitoba Advocate is doing its own investigation. Now, with the last two, they can't, force any charges or anything, but they could look at possibly what could change so that something like this doesn't happen in the future.
Britt, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you joining us to break this down a little more.
Thanks, Dennis.
To Ottawa now, where 2 days of federally led talks on addressing systemic racism in healthcare have just wrapped up. They follow up on an urgent meeting convened last year following the death of Joyce Eishia in a Quebec hospital. Our reporter in Ottawa, Brett Forrester, has the latest.
Thanks, Dennis. It's no secret Indigenous people face racism in healthcare. The racist taunts hurled at Joyce Eishia before she died made that clear. But the goal of these talks was to find solutions. Coming out of the meetings, Ottawa plans to kickstart engagement process on developing new Indigenous health legislation. The Prime Minister earmarked $15 million for this process in his 2020 throne speech. The federal government promises to increase support for Indigenous-led health organizations and development of new governance models that increase control over federally funded services. They're pledging $4 million to combat discrimination in medical schools and $2 million for the Atikamekw Nation to advocate for Joyce's principle. Indigenous leaders, provinces, territories, and healthcare professionals all received invites to today's talks, and 4 federal cabinet ministers also attended. They issued a detailed statement condemning systemic racism and its quote-unquote catastrophic effects. They say stamping it out will require collaboration and called on several other parties, the provinces in particular, to do their fair share. The plan is for a third round of meetings to take place in spring of this year. This is a developing story, and we're continuing to track reaction. Back to you in Winnipeg.
Thanks, Brett. According to several shelters for Indigenous women in Quebec, domestic violence does not end with COVID-19 lockdowns. Quite the opposite. They are afraid that some women are suffering abuse at home while the spaces in their shelters are empty. This is a story by Shushan Bacon, voiced by Lindsay Richardson.
This is what the Missinakw Women's Shelter looked like at its opening. A large gathering of people and smiles to celebrate the creation of a safe space for Indigenous women. But now the house is partly empty.
Présentement, j'ai quatre femmes, puis j'ai un enfant là, présentement. Okay. Un enfant de 4 mois à peu près. Fait que non, c'est pas rempli, mais il m'en manque une.
The shelter near Quebec City normally has place for 16 Indigenous women in need of a place to go, but because of COVID-19 public health measures, Missinakw can only currently accommodate 5 women. But demand has also decreased for Missinakw since the pandemic started. Another women's shelter on the north shore of Quebec is facing a similar situation. But according to the director of Tipinawagan in Wahat First Nation, the lack of occupants doesn't mean that women are not in need of their services.
Les femmes ne venaient pas en maison d'hébergement à cause du confinement. Les femmes préféraient rester à la maison avec un conjoint violent plutôt que de venir en maison d'hébergement par crainte soit d'attraper la COVID ou de ne pas nécessairement être à l'aise avec les restrictions dans le fond du confinement. Tu peux pas sortir, tu peux pas aller nulle part, fait que c'est plus, on va dire, agréable, entre guillemets, là, de rester dans un environnement que tu connais que dans un environnement que tu connais pas.
Jenny Hervieux from the Mamluk Indigenous Services Center wants women to know that if they can't leave their home, there are alternatives. They offer someone to talk to 24/7.
Notre job ne finit pas à 4 heures, nous autres. Surtout présentement, en temps de pandémie, quand on fait de l'anxiété, là, l'anxiété, elle n'arrête pas à 4 heures. Fait que des fois, elle commence à 4 heures. Fait que, puis elle est pire dans la nuit, en plus. Fait que oui, on est toujours en contact. Puis en même temps, je pense que les gens sont beaucoup sur Facebook, sur Messenger.
If you feel the need to talk or you know someone struggling with domestic abuse, you can call one of the numbers displayed on the screen. A story by Shushan Bacon, APTN National News, Wendake, Quebec.
Time now to step aside for a quick break. Coming up, part 2 of our interview with Nunavut MP Mumilak Kakak. Stick around. Welcome back. On Wednesday, we brought you a story about how Nunavut MP Mumilak Kakak was returning to work after 2 months off for depression and anxiety. Now, in part 2 of that interview, we find out what the MP has planned for this session of Parliament.
Now that she's back to work, it's back to the House of Commons for Nunavut MP Mumilak Kakak. Her plan for the session? It's straightforward.
My priorities, as always, are going to be housing, affordable living, and water. But I know that realistically in this time that COVID is what we need to be talking about.
One of the COVID discussions will be about whether people who access CERB, and shouldn't have, will be on the hook for repayment. Inuit organizations like ITK and NTI have already said they don't think Inuit should have to pay back CERB, regardless of the reason they got it. The MP doesn't go quite that far.
Overall, I don't think it's a question of should we be paying back CERB. I think the question is why are people in this situation? Why?
It was a trip to view Nunavut housing conditions firsthand that kick-started Kakak's anxiety, which led to her break. She has plans for what she learned on that trip and expects to present them in some form in about a month.
In the territory, we know it's dire. People unfortunately live it every day, but not enough people are angry outside of the territory. We're a really small population. If you have one voice in there shouting housing when everybody else is shouting somewhere else, it's pretty easy to get drowned out real quick.
She hasn't been back to Nunavut since October and spent Christmas in the south. While that happened, back home in Baker Lake, the community was facing a tragedy.
You know, Anson passing away was one of 3 suicides we've seen in my hometown in the last few weeks. And it's not the first Christmas/New Year's that's been 3 deaths by suicide. Another one of those was my old classmate. I went to high school with him. And I used to spend a lot of time, whenever there was a death by suicide, I spent a lot of time for about the first week and a bit. I'd check in on everybody else around me, and then I'd allow myself to grieve. And I don't do that anymore. I allow myself to be upset about it before I start checking in on others.
In small communities, a loss like the one Kakak is describing has ripple effects throughout the community.
But when you grow up in a place where it's normal to be substitute teaching and comforting a lot of the kids that you've coached or volunteered with or whatever, and to have to sit there in classrooms all day and sit with them on the floor crying and just trying to comfort them, like, this is the reality, unfortunately, of hundreds, if not thousands of people throughout the territory.
And that's her challenge. How do you try to help Nunavut Miut? Answering that challenge? That's what going back to work is going to mean for her. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Still in the north, youth in the small Decho community of Fort Providence, Northwest Territories, fought hard for a space to call their own. And as Charlotte Moore Jacobs explains in this encore presentation, even with the COVID-19 pandemic, they are making a case to keep the lights on.
Think about groups of 2 or 3 that you want to work with.
These are the faces of leaders.
Why did I join Youth Council? It's like I feel a part of something.
Who share similar values of culture and community.
And without our culture, we're nothing. To make our town a better place and bring people together.
Over the COVID-19 pandemic, the Youth Advisory Council in Fort Providence, Northwest Territories has blossomed to 9 members.
Like, we're molding it into whatever you want it to be, so.
With the help of Northern Loco, a local nonprofit specializing in social programming, youth have been successful in hosting events like a fall carnival and support one another with proposals like Dean Squirrel's dream of creating a small museum showcasing Dega Dene and Métis history.
Some of the stuff, like what they used to hunt with back in the day and what the houses or what they used to live in and all that, because the next generation will go there and see, like, this is what they used to live in.
Jatikwe
Fort Providence. Population, roughly 700. Youth here say healthy outlets are needed now more than ever, as their community battles an uptick in substance use during the pandemic.
Have some sort of like a sober weekend event, because on the weekends a lot of people drink and do drugs and stuff. In that, there's a lot of trauma because of what happened in residential school, so people are still recovering, and that's their coping mechanism, and hopefully we can stop that.
Who's ready to come inside?
Since opening the doors in spring of 2019, this youth center has been a hit and can see upwards of 30 kids in a single day.
We achieved a lot with this place, especially for the younger generation.
Shannon Bonarouge works at the center and was part of the high school class who secured $40,000 in funding from the hamlet to build the center.
It was just a room with dusty couches, piled of boxes, and garbage everywhere. Like, this was not a space to be used. And that's when we started to transform this place into what we wanted it as a youth.
Open 7 days a week, the center employs 4 youth per shift who prepare food and play games with younger kids.
Like, we have kids coming up to staff, like, you know, that they feel most comfortable talking with, and like, that's totally understandable. Like, we do give them advice and stuff, and we as a team, like, we decide like what's the best step to take with that kid.
While the pandemic has limited recreation, youth advisory counselors are moving ahead, ensuring the lights stay on as the winter gets dark.
Kids can come here and not see the violence from their parents. All the drinking and that around town.
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Fort Providence.
Time now for one more quick break, but stick around. There's more to come. Welcome back. Let's take a look now at our photo of the day. Today's photo comes from Margaret in Anugaming First Nation. A gray jay taking a break to enjoy the peaceful weather in her backyard. And you can send us your photos by emailing your shot to share@aptn.ca, and we'll do our best to get them on the air. Time now to take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, -2 in Halifax, 3 below with snow for Charlottetown, -7 with snow in Nain, 14 below in Kuujjuaq, -10 with snow in Montreal, 13 below with snow in Saguenay. Flurries and 6 below for Toronto, -8 and partly cloudy in Sault Ste. Marie. Sunny and -12 for Thunder Bay and Sioux Lookout. -19 in Churchill, 13 below for Norway House. -9 in Winnipeg and Brandon. -8 in Regina, 10 below with snow in Saskatoon. -12 in Meadow Lake, -19 in Stony Rapids. In northern Alberta, 24 below in Peace River, -21 in High Level. -9 in Medicine Hat, sunny and 10 below for Edmonton. +5 in Vancouver, 6 above in Victoria. -7 in Prince George, -24 for Fort Nelson. 32 below in Old Crow, -15 and snow in Whitehorse. -23 for Yellowknife, 31 below in Wrigley, 36 below in Norman Wells. -23 with flurries in Sax Harbor, 36 below in Colville Lake. -25 with snow in Baker Lake, 31 below, and flurries for Cambridge Bay. -23 in Resolute, 24 below with snow for Igloolik. A 9-year-old Algonquin boy in Quebec is making waves on social media for his moves on the ice. And that ice is in his own backyard. Our Daryl Stranger has this story for us.
Eishia Hudson is making a name for himself in the hockey world thanks to his viral videos showcasing his hockey skills. The 9-year-old from Algonquins of Barrier Lake has been playing hockey since he was 4. Eishia is unable to play or practice hockey due to the pandemic, so the family decided to build him and his brother a backyard rink where they could hone their skills.
Hockey is a huge thing with us. We have weekend games, we have weekday practices. So for us to lose that and for the boys to lose it, we wanted to, we said we would make an outdoor rink. And we had tried the bid last year, but this year we wanted to make it bigger and better.
The rink is complete with miniature boards and lights so the kids can play almost any time. Eishia's videos have garnered millions of views on social media, with the NHL even posting on their social media accounts. He says he loves everything about the rink and being on the ice.
Having a backyard rink is awesome. I love skating, I love doing slap shots, and I love doing trick shots. I hope all you other kids keep on skating.
The family is also working on incorporating Indigenous music into the videos as a way to showcase their heritage.
We were talking with my sister who is a singer for Black Bear. She sings the vocals for it as well, so we were trying to incorporate some of her music in there. We want to be able for Wash to be proud of who he is. So through these songs that they do sing, it makes them proud. For him, being First Nations and being recognized at this level, it was a huge deal for him.
Eishia has just one reminder for all the other kids out there that are watching his videos.
These trick shots are fun, but guys, remember, the most important part about hockey is playing as a team. Miigwech.
Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Those are some wicked moves and a great backyard rink. Let's head off to Ottawa now, and I know Todd Lamarand has some great moves too, but for now he'll tell us about what's coming up tonight on Nation to Nation.
Tonight on Nation to Nation, I'll be speaking to a chief from a Northern Ontario First Nation, and he has questions. For example, why is his community not a priority for getting the COVID-19 vaccine? Yes, it's in Northern Ontario, but Constance Lake is near Highway 11 and a half-hour's drive from Hearst, Ontario. But that should not make a difference, says Chief Rick Allen.
And we're still at the bottom of the list. There seems to be no urgency among government officials or anyone.
As well, I talked to the president of the Native Women's Association of Canada, Lorraine Whitman. She attended a meeting yesterday and today of dozens of Indigenous health stakeholders about the problem of systemic racism in healthcare. I'll get her thoughts. That's coming up in a few minutes. I'll see you then.
Maybe Todd and I will get to show off our hockey skills here one day. But for now, that's all the time we have for your APTN National News. For more on these and other stories, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Stick around. Todd's up next with Nation to Nation. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.